It's hard to believe, but Star Wars has been with us for almost half a century. And during that time, a lot has happened to the series. Unexpected success, expansion into a multimedia franchise, heavily criticized prequels, the transition under Disney's wing, and finally, a sequel trilogy that audiences, it seems, would rather not remember. And then there's the countless number of TV shows, video games, comic books, and an incredible multitude of references in other works of popular culture.
Surrender, Buzz Lightyear. I have won.
I'll never give in. You killed my father.
No, Buzz. I am your father.
In reality, the story of Star Wars Rise is not as straightforward as it might seem. Even the parts of the saga that are now considered classics were heavily criticized at the time. In this video essay, we'll try to figure out the secret behind Star Wars longevity, what went wrong with the franchise, and what future might await the series about a galaxy far, far away.
Now's our chance, go.
During the production of the first Star Wars, George Lucas was considered, at best, a secondary director in Hollywood. Although he had already made his mark in feature filmmaking, he had no hits on the level of The Godfather or Jaws. So, a story about a mysterious force, robots, and space cowboys seemed like a risky venture to the studios. The leading roles were played, essentially, by newcomers. The only ones who could be called stars, and only with some stretch, were elderly British actors. And even many members of the crew didn't believe in the script. Star Wars was a pure creative experiment, very much in the spirit of the New Hollywood era. At a time when mainstream cinema was dominated by realistic dramas on complex topics, Lucas set out to make a nostalgic adventure film in the style of Flash Gordon, a strange mix of fantasy and science fiction. And for creating this magical world, cutting-edge special effects were, for him, no less important than the story itself. As a young man, Lucas was fascinated by technology, and Star Wars became his chance to push the boundaries of cinema. As history showed, the experiment succeeded. The first part of the saga became so successful, largely because it resonated with a wide range of viewers. Younger audiences got a colorful fairy tale about knights, only with lightsabers, while their parents saw a timely commentary on the 20th century. The references to the aesthetics of the Third Reich and the Vietnam War are unmistakable in the saga. But more importantly, Star Wars offered an unprecedented spectacle, with massive space battles and lightsaber duels. This is the true significance of Star Wars for the history of cinema. Lucas, through his own experience, worked out the formula for the ideal studio film, designed for everyone, from children to adults. It's no coincidence that the first film is often called a screen adaptation of Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, a book about the structure of the protagonist's journey. In essence, Lucas popularized in Hollywood the universal hero's journey formula, an opening where the character sets off on a dangerous adventure, a second act that brings the main internal transformations, a climax that presents the hero's greatest challenge, and a resolution where stability is restored to the world. While such stories have always existed, it was only after the success of Star Wars that they became in producers' minds the kind of plot that would satisfy the majority of audiences. It's no exaggeration to say that many modern blockbusters in terms of storytelling and focus on spectacle owe much to Lucas. However, the director did not intend to rest on his laurels for long. He wanted the sequel to be more mature and considerably more ambitious in scale. Today, the fifth episode is considered by many to be the best part of the series, but at the time of its release, many critics and viewers didn't appreciate the changes. Luke faced the temptation of the dark side, and the level of brutality toward the heroes increased significantly. Just think of Han Solo's fate. And the series itself shifted from being a space fairy tale to something more like a family drama. It's important to note that, although Lucas retained creative control over the series, he still chose not to direct the fifth and sixth episodes himself. For these, he found reliable craftsmen who could bring his ideas to life. In essence, he became one of the first creative producers who defined the entire look and feel of a franchise, a model still popular in Hollywood today. Just think of Kevin Feige and his brainchild, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Lucas also seemed to be sensitive to criticism, as the sixth episode was notably more cheerful and lighthearted compared to the previous one, though even that didn't spare it from lukewarm reviews in the press. The paradox of the original Star Wars trilogy is that despite its outstanding achievements in the field of special effects, even by the standards of its contemporaries, it was not the most inventive cinema. It had almost no virtuoso camera work, refined mise-en-scène, or innovative directorial techniques. Lucas's real contribution was in reimagining the business model of filmmaking, where the focus was not so much on the films themselves, but on the universe in which the events unfolded. That's why Star Wars, almost from the very beginning, became more than just cinema. Rather, it was an entry point into a galaxy far, far away, a place audiences were invited to return to again and again through books or games. Cliffhangers at the end, sequels expanding the universe, and the very division of franchises into trilogies, we owe all of this to Star Wars.
I am your father.
No. It's not true.
That's impossible!
From the start, Lucas understood that the original trilogy was only part of a larger story. But due to technological limitations, he couldn't depict on screen the events that preceded Episode 4. It took more than 15 years before computer technology once again expanded the possibilities of cinema. The prequel trilogy was at once similar to and different from Star Wars. Yes, there were still lightsabers, the Force, and Jedi, and the action scenes became far more spectacular. But at the same time, the space saga began to resemble a political drama, full of behind-the-scenes intrigue and conspiracies. It's hard to call the prequels naive children's films, if only because Star Wars now required the audience to grasp the nuances of the galaxy's political system. The saga became less of an escapist entertainment and more of a statement on the crisis of democracy.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
There were references to the Roman Empire, and in the depiction of the Republic, it was hard not to see a portrait of America at the time. Equally important, the new trilogy was fully an auteur project. Lucas served as writer and director for all 3 films. But that didn't shield them from fierce criticism. Viewers disliked the acting, particularly that of Hayden Christensen, as well as the romantic subplot and the clunky dialogue.
Go.
I don't want to disturb you.
Your presence is soothing.
You had another nightmare last night.
Jedi don't have nightmares.
One of the biggest targets of fan backlash was Jar Jar Binks, a secondary character from Episode 1 whose role was significantly reduced in the later films. Yet despite all the partly justified criticism, Star Wars could still impress. Take, for example, the opening scene of Episode 3, where Lucas uses a single uninterrupted shot to immerse us in the battle over Coruscant. The camera choreography is breathtaking, and in terms of special effects, Lucas could rival even modern blockbusters. In Episode 2, he uses a handheld camera to plunge us into the thick of battle. While in Episode 1, subjective camera angles drop the viewer right into the cockpit of a pod racer. There were similar moments in the original trilogy's space battles, but due to technological limits, they didn't look nearly as impressive. With such simple techniques, Lucas maintained visual continuity between the films. And that's not to mention the lightsaber duels, which, in terms of choreography, resemble intricate dance performances. Whatever people say about the prequels, within the franchise, they are undoubtedly the most cohesive and consistent trilogy. It's no surprise that, over time, fans and audiences softened their stance and began to see them as true Star Wars, a grand epic marking the onset of dark times. After Episode 3 came the animated series The Clone Wars, which fans rightfully consider one of the best works in the franchise. Over several seasons, the creators filled in many details left out of the prequels and developed the relationships between the saga's central characters more deeply. They also portrayed the clones as human, sympathetic characters, making the infamous Order 66 all the more chilling. Keeping all this in mind, one could say that the prequel era is perhaps the best thing that happened to the franchise.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them! Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness!
Lucas had been planning a continuation of the Skywalker saga for decades. But working on the series had exhausted him to the point that he decided to sell the rights and spend more time with his family. At the same time, Lucas didn't want strangers running the franchise. So, after the transition to Disney, Star Wars was placed under the leadership of Kathleen Kennedy, a producer who had known Lucas since the 1980s and had worked on films by his friend Steven Spielberg. The studio wanted the new Star Wars to pay homage to the classics while also pushing the story forward and matching the spirit of the times. J.J. Abrams, who took on Episode 7, seemed almost the perfect choice for director. Not only was he a longtime fan of the series, but he had also recently succeeded in rebooting another iconic sci-fi franchise of the past, Star Trek. Abrams is often criticized for quoting the original trilogy too heavily, from signature wipe transitions to the opening pan shot of space, and even certain specific mise-en-scènes. The Force Awakens really did exploit fans' nostalgia. So closely did it resemble what we had already seen before. Another desert planet, yet another, the third, Death Star. A pointedly humble protagonist drawn to the Force. New villains in menacing helmets, and countless references that were more tiring than exciting. Still, the same could be said of Lucas himself. Even in the prequels, he used fan service, didn't shy away from profiting from merchandise, and in some cases almost literally repeated events from the original trilogy. And it's not even about Tatooine, the planet to which Star Wars characters keep returning again and again. At the end of the first episode, the young hero loses his mentor and blows up a space station. In the second, he undergoes the temptation of the dark side and then loses a hand. In the third, he has a final reckoning with a father figure. For Anakin, that role is played by Obi-Wan. The cyclical nature of the story is not so much a flaw as it is a defining feature of Star Wars. From this point of view, even the return of Palpatine doesn't seem all that absurd. The Empire inevitably strikes back. Still, Abrams deserves credit for how skillfully he works with the camera. He uses dynamic angles, gives close-ups a particular painterly quality, and isn't afraid of sudden zooms. He even has scenes with elegant in-camera editing, very much in the spirit of Spielberg. You could say that Abrams' films are, in some ways, even more Star Wars than what the creator of the series himself filmed, at least in terms of visual storytelling. In this sense, The Last Jedi, the 8th episode of the series, became something of an anti-Star Wars story, an attempt to reinterpret everything familiar. Fans didn't like how the creators changed Luke's character, turning him from a wise warrior into an irritable and disillusioned old man. The filmmakers as a whole took a critical approach to blockbuster tropes of machismo and heroic self-sacrifice. Special attention was given to the death of Snoke, a character who had been presented as the main antagonist of the sequels, but ended up as nothing more than an interim villain. Director Rian Johnson not only played with the narrative conventions of Star Wars, but also reinterpreted its visual language. For example, an epic shot of a spaceship landing was turned into a joke, an iron on the hull of an Imperial Star Destroyer. The telepathic connection between Rey and Kylo Ren was shown like a standard over-the-shoulder dialogue, except the characters were in entirely different locations. And Leia's space levitation was made by Johnson to feel more comical than tragic. The action scenes in The Last Jedi also dared to take bold steps, like the finale, where the creators used striking red accents to heighten the drama. Johnson tried to refresh the series and add a kind of comedic spontaneity, but he burned himself on the audience's reaction. Fans reacted painfully to the change in tone and even launched a petition demanding that The Last Jedi be removed from canon.
Oh, hey, come on. It's not worth it, man. It's not worth it. Not worth it.
Perhaps this sharp backlash was one of the reasons why Episode 9 ended up so compromise-driven. The creators had to answer all the questions raised in Episode 7, respect fans' feelings, and conclude the new trilogy in a clear way. While the film still had surprises, by the 9th part, audiences were already tired of the Skywalker saga. Against this backdrop, spin-offs about secondary characters seemed even more interesting. Following the cinematic universe trend, Disney began expanding Star Wars sideways. In recent years, we've gotten a whole stream of projects, mostly animated and television. The most successful of them, such as the first seasons of The Mandalorian or the film Rogue One, stood out favorably from the numbered episodes. They offered grounded stories about ordinary people, without the Force, and without lightsabers. Rogue One impressed with its uncompromising approach to its characters. The ending is tragic, but the mission is accomplished. The same can be said about Andor, which contains almost no hint of magic, but offers a deep exploration of everyday life in a totalitarian state, and the theme of the banality of evil. Visually, it feels closer to reality, analog sets, tangible textures, and less digital polish. The third season of The Mandalorian suffered from trying to expand a small-scale story about a bounty hunter and baby Grogu into something matching the scope of the main saga. The creators chased fan service and callbacks instead of telling a self-contained story. Notably, the new projects have stopped idealizing their heroes. Both Rebels and Jedi often appear as contradictory, sometimes even unpleasant characters. This makes them more interesting, but also alienates some viewers. The franchise's problem is that for every successful experiment, there are two mediocre projects. Where Star Wars once drew appeal from its scarcity, when fans had to wait years for a single movie, now there's so much content that it's hard to keep up. As a result, the franchise suffers from the very thing that made it popular, an enormous universe in which an average viewer can easily get lost. The situation is made worse by the fact that Kathleen Kennedy seems to lack a coherent long-term plan for the series. Successful projects feel like accidents rather than the result of strategy. Films and series are announced and then canceled. Some languish in production limbo for years. It seems the producers are beginning to realize that focusing on quantity over quality has stopped working. Most likely, the franchise will undergo another rethinking in the coming years. Fan service will, of course, never disappear. But we can only hope that the Force won't abandon the creators. Lamenting that Star Wars isn't what it used to be is pointless. For half a century, it has been constantly criticized, and fans haven't always greeted even Lucas's own work with unreserved enthusiasm. In any case, everyone has their own Star Wars. The original trilogy has long since become a classic. The prequels raised the kids of the 90s, and the sequels, no matter how much they're scolded, will probably be remembered nostalgically one day by those who saw them in their youth. There's no doubt, the franchise will be with us for a long time to come, and its prolonged creative slump will eventually end. The only question is, who will save the galaxy far, far away this time?